What if a single comment, just one carefully worded statement, could send the internet into a frenzy without even saying everything directly? Because that's exactly what's happening right now after Candace Owens dropped a comment that people think points to something deeply personal involving Erika. At first, it didn't sound like much. Easy to miss. Easy to scroll past. But then something changed. People started reading between the lines. And suddenly, a wave of questions exploded online. And this is where it gets strange. No one actually confirmed anything, but the speculation alone was enough to spark a full-blown controversy. So now the question is, what was really being hinted at? And why did it hit this hard? To understand why this situation escalated so quickly, you have to look at how sensitive the topic is and who brought it into the spotlight. When Candace Owens speaks, people don't just listen, they analyze every word, especially when the message feels indirect. And that's exactly what happened here. The comment wasn't long, it wasn't dramatic, but it hinted at something personal involving Erika, something that wasn't part of the public conversation before. At least, not clearly. And that's where things started to spiral. Because Erika had already been building visibility in circles connected to Turning Point USA. Her presence was growing. Her name was appearing more often. People were paying attention. But then, something changed. Candace's comment introduced a completely different angle. Not about influence. Not about positioning. But about something personal. And this is where it gets strange. No direct claim was made. No confirmation. Just a suggestion subtle enough to avoid clarity, but strong enough to spark curiosity. And curiosity turns into speculation fast. But here's the problem. Once people started speculating, the story took on a life of its own. Different interpretations, different theories, all based on the same short comment. And none of them confirmed. And that's what made it explode. Because now, it wasn't just about what was said. It was about what people thought it meant. And once that gap opened, there was no controlling it. Because when something personal enters a public conversation without clear context, it doesn't stay contained. It spreads. And that's exactly what happened here. Because within hours, the discussion shifted from curiosity to full-blown controversy. It all traces back to a single moment that, at first, didn't seem like it would matter. A clip. Short. Almost forgettable. In it, Candace Owens is speaking on a broader topic, public image, responsibility, and how personal decisions can intersect with public life. Nothing unusual, something she's talked about before. But then, something changed. She added a line that didn't fit the rest of the conversation. She said, "Sometimes people think they can keep personal things separate until they can't anymore." That line, it landed differently because it felt specific, not general. And this is where it gets strange. She didn't mention Erika, not directly, but the timing? Too precise. Because within minutes of that clip circulating, people started connecting it to Erika's name, someone who had already been gaining attention inside circles tied to Turning Point USA. And once that connection was made, everything shifted. Because now, that one sentence wasn't just commentary. It was interpreted as a hint. But here's the problem. There was no confirmation, no follow-up, no explanation of what she meant. Just that line. And that gap, it created space. Space for people to speculate. And speculate they did. And it doesn't stop there. A second clip surfaced. Different context. Same tone. This time, Candace talked about situations that change how people are perceived overnight. Again, no names. But the phrasing? Similar. And suddenly, it didn't feel like coincidence anymore. It felt intentional. And that's when things started falling apart. Because now, people weren't just watching the clips. They were analyzing them. Looking for patterns. Looking for clues. Trying to figure out what exactly she was hinting at. And then, someone pointed something out. A timeline. Not confirmed. But noticeable. Moments where Erika's visibility shifted. Moments where she appeared less. Moments where things felt slightly different. Subtle, but enough. And once people saw that, they started asking a different question. Not, what did Candace mean? But, what changed? Because if something personal had entered the situation, it could explain the shift. And that idea spread fast. Because now, the speculation had direction. But then, something changed again. A comment surfaced. Not from Candace. Not from Erika. From someone who claimed to be close to the situation. They wrote, "People don't realize how quickly things can change behind the scenes." That line added fuel instantly, because now it didn't feel like random speculation. It felt like there might be something happening privately, something not being said publicly. And that's where the tension really started building. Because now, the story had layers. A koman, a hint, a timeline, and a possible shift, all pointing in the same direction, but without confirmation. And that's what made it powerful. Because the more people tried to understand it, the more questions it raised. And the biggest one? What exactly was being hinted at? Because whatever it was enough to change how people were looking at everything. And just when it seemed like the speculation couldn't go any further, another piece surfaced. And this one, it didn't just hint at something personal. It made the situation feel a lot more serious. The next piece didn't come from Candace. It came from the audience. And that's when everything started moving faster than anyone expected. Because once people locked onto that first comment, they didn't wait for clarification. They started digging on their own. Old posts, recent appearances, gaps in activity. And this is where it gets strange. They noticed something subtle. Erika's presence had shifted. Not dramatically, but noticeably. Fewer appearances, less visibility, a different pace compared to what people were used to seeing. Individually, it meant nothing. But combined with Candace's comments, it felt connected. But here's the problem. A change in activity doesn't confirm anything. People step back for all kinds of reasons. And yet, that didn't stop the speculation. Because now, the internet had a narrative. And once a narrative forms, it grows. And it doesn't stop there. A clip resurfaced this time not from Candace, but from a past interview where she talked about how personal decisions can impact public roles in ways people don't expect. At the time, general advice. Now, people treated it like context, like it was somehow tied to what was happening now. And suddenly, everything started linking together, even if it wasn't meant to. And that's when things started falling apart even faster. Because the conversation shifted from what was said to what must be happening. And that leap, that's where things get dangerous. Because now, people weren't just interpreting, they were assuming. And those assumptions started spreading everywhere. Different versions, different theories, all built on the same few lines from Candace. And this is where the tension really escalated. Because Erika still hadn't said anything. No response. No clarification. Nothing to confirm or deny any of it. And in a situation like this, silence doesn't calm things down. It amplifies everything. Because now, every detail gets magnified. Every absence gets questioned. Every change becomes evidence. And that's when things took another turn. A post appeared from someone claiming to know more than people think. No proof. No verification. But the wording? Confidence. They said, people are connecting the dots, but not all of them. That line spread fast. Because now, it added a new layer. The idea that something was real but misunderstood. And that idea? It pulled even more people in. Because now, the question wasn't just, is this true? It became, what are we missing? And once that question takes hold, the story grows bigger than the original comment ever was. And that's exactly what happened. Because now, it wasn't just about Candace's words. It was about everything surrounding them. The timing, the silence, the shifts, all of it. But the biggest twist? None of it was confirmed. Not a single piece. And yet, the impact was real. Because perception had already changed. And once perception shifts, it's hard to reverse. But just when it seemed like the speculation couldn't get any more intense, something else happened. And this time, it didn't come from the audience. It came from closer to the center. And that's when everything escalated. The next shift didn't come from a viral clip. It came from someone closer to the situation. Not a major public figure, not verified, but close enough that people started paying attention immediately. And what they said didn't confirm anything, but it didn't deny it either. And this is where it gets strange. They posted a short message. People are running with a story that isn't fully understood. That's it. But that one line, it changed everything. Because now, it wasn't just random speculation anymore. It felt like someone on the inside was acknowledging that something was happening, but not the way people thought. But here's the problem. They didn't explain what was misunderstood. They didn't correct anything. They didn't provide context. They just left it there. And that ambiguity, it made things worse. Because now, people have two possibilities. Either the speculation was wrong, or it was incomplete. And both of those options kept the story alive. And it doesn't stop there. Another detail surfaced. A clip from a smaller event where Candace Owens was speaking again. This time, she didn't hint at anything directly, but she said something that hit differently in context. She talked about how quickly narratives can spiral when people don't have full information. That line spread instantly, because now it sounded like a response without being one. And suddenly, everything felt more complicated. Because was she addressing the speculation? Or was she reinforcing that something real was being misunderstood? No one knew. And that uncertainty, it pushed the tension even higher. Because now, the story wasn't just about what was hinted. It was about what wasn't being clarified. And that's when things started falling apart in a bigger way. Because people began looking at reactions, not just words. Behavior, silence, timing, and, weirdly, patterns started appearing again. Moments where Erika stayed completely quiet. Moments where others avoided the topic entirely. Moments where the conversation was redirected instead of addressed. Individually, nothing conclusive. But together, it felt intentional. And that's what made everything more intense. Because when multiple people avoid the same topic, it doesn't feel accidental. It feels coordinated. But then, something changed again. A new comment surfaced. This time from someone who had been neutral the entire time. They said, "The issue isn't what was said, it's what hasn't been said." That line hit harder than anything before, because it simplified everything. The problem wasn't the claim. It wasn't speculation. It was the lack of clarity. And once people saw it that way, everything shifted again. Because now, the focus wasn't on the rumor. It was in the silence around it. And that silence, it became the center of the story. And that's where the tension peaked. Because now, people weren't just asking what happened. They were asking why no one was explaining it. And that question, it kept growing. Because the longer it went unanswered, the more serious it felt. And just when it seemed like the situation couldn't get more intense, it did. Because now, it wasn't just speculation or indirect comments. Something else surfaced. Something that didn't just raise questions. It reframed the entire situation. And if what people are saying about it is true, then everything we've seen so far might only be part of the story. And that's when everything moved from speculation into something much louder. Because now, it wasn't just random users talking. It was an organized discussion, breakdowns, full threads. People lay everything out step by step. And that changed the tone completely. Because once multiple voices start analyzing the same situation, it stops feeling like noise. It starts feeling like a pattern. And this is where it gets strange. Different people who weren't connected to each other started reaching the same conclusion. Not about what happened, but about how it was being handled. The silence, the indirect comments, the lack of clarity. All of it pointed to one thing. Something was being avoided. But here's the problem. Avoidance doesn't tell you what's true. It only tells you what's not being said. And that gap, it kept pulling more people in. And it doesn't stop there. because now the creators have started covering it. Videos, streams, commentary, each one adding a new layer. Not new facts, but new interpretations. And suddenly, the story wasn't just growing, it was evolving, because every new voice added pressure. Pressure for a response, pressure for clarity, pressure for someone to say something direct. And that's when things started falling apart even faster, because Candace Owens spoke again, not directly addressing the situation, but close enough. She said, "People think they understand something when they only have pieces of it." That line hit instantly, because now it felt like she was acknowledging the situation without confirming anything. And that ambiguity, it pushed the tension even higher, because now there were two interpretations. Either the speculation was wrong, or it was incomplete. And both kept the story alive. But then, something changed. Erika finally reacted. Not a full statement, not a breakdown, just a short post. She wrote, "Not everything online deserves a response." That's it. But that one line, it split everything. Because now, people had something direct, and they interpreted it differently. Some saw it as confidence, a refusal to engage with rumors. Others saw it as avoidance, a way to sidestep the conversation entirely. And that division, it made everything bigger. Because now, it wasn't just about what was said. It was about how people felt about it. And those feelings, they spread fast. And this is where the tension hit its peak. Because now, everything was out in the open. The hint, the speculation, the silence, the response, all of it. But still, no clear answer. And that's what made it worse. Because at this point, clarity wasn't just expected. It was demanded. But it didn't come. And that absence, it became the story. Because when something personal enters a public conversation, and no one explains it, people don't stop asking. They dig deeper. They analyze more. They look for anything that fills the gap. And that's exactly what was happening now. But then, the biggest twist hit. Not a post, not a comment, something else. Something that didn't just add to the story, it changed how people understood it entirely. And if what people are saying is true, then everything we've seen so far might not mean what we think it does. And then, the piece that changed everything finally surfaced. Not a confirmation, not a denial. Something in between. A clarification, quiet, indirect, but enough to shift how people saw the entire situation. And this is where it gets strange. The information didn't come from a big announcement. It came from context. From people stepping back and looking at what was actually said instead of what was assumed. Because when Candace's original comment was replayed carefully, it didn't directly point to what everyone thought it did. It pointed to something broader. Something about perception. About how personal narratives get shaped when information is incomplete. And suddenly, everything started looking different. But here's the problem. By that point, the story had already grown. The speculation had already taken over. And even if the original comment wasn't as direct as people believed, the impact was already real. And it doesn't stop there. Because when people compared the original clip to the reactions that followed, a pattern emerged. The story didn't grow because of what was said. It grew because of how it was interpreted. And that changed everything. Because now, the focus has shifted from what's being exposed to how did this narrative form so fast? And that's the reveal. Not that something specific was confirmed, but that situation escalated far beyond what was actually said, driven by gaps, assumptions, and the speed of online reaction. And when you look at it that way, the entire situation flips. Because instead of a clear exposure, it becomes a case study in how quickly perception can spiral, how a single line without context can turn into something much bigger, and how once that process starts, it's almost impossible to stop. And if that's true, then the biggest part of this story isn't what was hinted at. It's how the reaction took over everything. When you step back and look at everything together, the original comment, the reactions, the silence, And how quickly the story grew, it stops being about one specific claim. It becomes about how narratives form in real time. Because what this situation really shows isn't just about Candace Owens or Erika. It's about how quickly interpretation can outpace reality. Think about it. One line gets said, no clear explanation follows. And suddenly, thousands of people start filling in the blanks. Each person adds their own version, their own assumptions, their own conclusions. And that's how a narrative is built. Not from confirmed facts, but from gaps. And this is where it hits deeper. The more something isn't clarified, the more powerful the speculation becomes. Because people don't like uncertainty. They try to resolve it, even if it means guessing. And that's exactly what happened here. The story didn't grow because of what was confirmed. It grew because of what wasn't. And that's what makes it so intense. Because once a narrative like that takes hold, it doesn't just disappear when context arrives. It sticks. It shapes perception. And it becomes part of how people see the situation moving forward. And maybe that's the real takeaway here. Not just what was said, but how quickly everything changed because no one fully explained it. So now it all comes down to one question. Did this situation ever really mean what people thought it did? Or did it spiral into something bigger than the original comment itself? Because if a single line can create this level of reaction without clear context, what does that say about how stories form online? Drop your thoughts below. Do you think this was misunderstood? Or was there something more beneath the surface? And if you want more deep dives like this, make sure you subscribe. Because sometimes the biggest stories aren't about what's confirmed, they're about how fast people decide what to believe.